is perceived as members of the Black community who pose a threat to police. But the nation's largest Black police group says the label is a danger to the Black community and is, quote, ill-advised. Joining us now from Skype from Atlanta is Clarence Cox, president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. Thank you for joining us, Clarence.
Thank you. Good morning, Michelle and other panelists.
Thank you so much. So let me ask you, where did this title come from? How did they come up with this?
You know, that's a question we had for them as well, and the answer was that it was designed for officer safety, and it was a report that was based on the assessments concerning a influence between the sovereign citizenry extremist movement and the Black identity extremists, which we had never heard of before. And it was on the ideology of people in the Black community who were angry about some of the recent use of force cases in our country. And to group African Americans in that type of way was very alarming and disturbing to us.
So tell the viewing audience, what are you doing about this?
Well, when we were first made aware of it, much like many of you, we reached out to the FBI leadership to determine, if this was a fake news, as some say these days. And once they, produced copies and shared with us the document, we, certainly after reading the contents, we found no reference to any officer safety, any value to officer safety. And then we started to question the origin and how they came up with this. And we met with some senior FBI officials who defended this product.
But Clarence, let me ask you, what did the document say? I'm curious. If there's nothing in there about safety, what does the document say?
Well, without being specific, because it's still a law enforcement unclassified document and it would violate my privilege to have these documents. I can't go into the great specifics, but to summarize, it basically encompassed a lot of violent acts, to include the shooting in Dallas and some others, all the way back to the 1960s and the civil rights era. And that's when the Hooverism came into our minds, like, now you guys are starting to track folks like myself. I mean, we are just as angry when we have unjustified shootings in the Black community as many of the folks who marched in the streets. But because of our very oaths of office, we don't get out there and protest, but we certainly make it very vocal that we're not in agreement with some of the findings. So to group African Americans in a bowl, if you will, because they are upset, or because we are upset with some of the findings as a result of the use of force cases around the country, is very unfair and certainly not something we're going to stand by and be quiet about. We're obviously making noise about it, and we feel like it's justified noise. We are not going to be out in the street stomping and dragging, but certainly we're going to hold these people accountable. And I actually had a great meeting with the new director, Chris Ray, and to his point, I don't think that this thing was crafted before he was actually confirmed as a director, but it's now his job to do something about this, to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and then the folks who were responsible are held accountable.
Clarence, I'm going to ask you to stay with us for a second. I've got a quick read, and then we're going to go to one of our panelists has a question for you, but I want to just go through something, because when questioned earlier this month before the House Judiciary Committee about the report and the Black identity extremist label, Attorney General Jeff Sessions surprisingly seemed to know nothing about it.
Would you consider Black Lives Matter a Black identity extremist group?
I'm not able to comment on that. I have not so declared it.
So you should know that a lot of activists around the country are very concerned that we're getting ready to repeat a very sad chapter of our history. where people who are rightfully protesting what they consider to be an injustice in their community, which is their relationship with police officers, are now being targeted and labeled as extremists and are going through periods of surveillance and harassment. And so I would like to know, what is your department going to do to protect the rights of average citizens to protest if they have a concern about police officers?
This department will not unlawfully target people.
Yeah, I really believe that. Clarence, thank you for staying with us. I'm going to turn to Spencer Overton now. He has a question for you. Spencer.
Well, thank you very much, Clarence. I mean, Noble has played a significant role in terms of mediating the relationship between the black community and police officers. So thanks for the leadership. I guess the big concern I have is this notion of criminalizing consciousness, this notion of outlawing activities of supporting this notion of the value of black life. There's a certain 1984 totalitarian notion of, if you criticize here, we will use the power of the state and law enforcement against you. I think that's what makes many of us uncomfortable.
And certainly that's where we are. We're on the same page when it comes to that. And I have made suggestions to the FBI to eliminate this issue. One is the diversity in its ranks. And, we've spoke with James Comey before he was removed about the diversity in the organization.
And what was his response? What was Comey's response about the diversity? I'm just asking. I'm sitting here with one of my Howard University bison, and Comey spoke at Howard University just within the last few months. And I believe is in is it a teaching capacity or?
Yeah, he's doing some forums. So this is one of the issues that has come up.
That's come up. So I'm interested in hearing what Comey's response was.
Well, former Director Comey's excuse was that he inherited the FBI in the condition that it was in. And I'm always in the belief, when you're in charge, you can make a change. So we challenged him several times, and we were having some very positive conversations before his removal. And one thing I will credit James, if I can throw this in here real quick, is he did create a use of force database. That's something that we've asked for, and that's the only, data that's available across the country. Unfortunately, it's a voluntarily basis. So we're asking agencies across the country to opt in and submit that data, because right now there's no warehousing of use of force data for the 18,000 police agencies across the country. So I credit him for that, and that's something that significantly improves our relationship in the black community. But it is now Director Wray's charge to go ahead and make the real changes, and that is to include some folks. When you have 11% diversity in the FBI, one of our nation's leading law enforcement agencies, that's a big problem, a huge problem, especially when some of the recommendations that came out of the 21st Century Policing document, which is the latest and greatest, in my opinion, document on modern policing, it recommends as one of the pillows in that document that your agency reflects the community that you serve. So across this country, if your agencies don't have diversity, and if they don't kind of mimic the community, if you will, we're in trouble. And the citizens across this country should be demanding that law enforcement leaders make their agencies, resemble the communities in which we serve. So we've asked the FBI in regards to the Black Identity Extremist document to, one, eliminate that classification immediately, and no future assessments like that should be published. We've also asked that they solicit law enforcement subject matter experts such as Noble and other groups that would have some skin in the game, if you will. And then we asked that they put together an assessment briefing for African American leaders across this country, because we are very concerned with building trust and legitimacy in these communities that we serve. We've got to.
Clarence, we are so thankful for the work you're doing. Clarence Cox, thank you so much for joining us. Now, next ahead on